President Liebren, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us for this special event this evening. I am truly delighted to welcome the Ambassador of France to the United States, His Excellency François Delattre, to Rice University's Baker Institute. Ambassador Delattre joins the ranks of eminent French speakers at the Institute, including former French President Valéry Giscard d'Estaing and former French Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin. Ambassador Delattre is the fourth French ambassador to speak at the Baker Institute. We had François Boulon in 1999, Jean-David Lévite in May of 2003, Pierre Vimont in March 2008. So I propose, Mr. Ambassador, if your government wants to have a conference of French ambassadors, you have a home here. Last year, while in Washington, D.C. for a joint Baker Institute U.S. Institute for Peace conference to commemorate the 20th anniversary of the direct face-to-face negotiations between Israel and its Arab neighbors, Ambassador and Mrs. Delattre, who is with us, Sophie, generously entertained us at their magnificent residence, and a seed was planted with Secretary Baker, and Susan Baker was there. We had a wonderful reception at your home. To plan Ambassador Delatte's first official visit to Houston and his family's first exposure to the rodeo. Monsieur l'Ambassadeur and Madame Delattre, we are honored with your visit to Houston, and I thank you for lending your highly respected voice to our forum here. As you all know, the French-American partnership is historic, dating back to the American Revolution, and is clearly one of the most important of the transatlantic relations. As a leading member of NATO, France is one of the closest allies of the United States. Together, France and the United States have supported the transition to democracy in Egypt, Libya, Tunisia. We have also supported together the Arab League in its efforts to end the violence in Syria. Our two nations undoubtedly will continue to work together for self-determination, freedom, and peace in the Middle East and around the world. That is our heritage of both countries as one of the earliest and most important democracies in the world. We are indeed privileged to have the opportunity this evening to hear Ambassador Delatte's important and informed perspectives on U.S.-French relationship. The ambassador has a long and distinguished career. He was appointed Ambassador of France to the United States in February 2011. He previously served to the north of us as Ambassador of France to Canada. He was Consul General in New York and Press and Communications Director at the French Embassy in Washington, D.C. As noted in your program, Ambassador Delattre has held numerous important positions in the French Foreign Ministry and overseas. As a member of then French President Jacques Chirac's foreign policy team, he was responsible for European and transatlantic defense and security matters, and for managing the critical Bosnian crisis. During the historic and momentous period marked by the end of the Cold War, our speaker was posted in Bonn at the French Embassy in West Germany. There he was in charge of matters pertaining to the economic impact of Germany's unification and the environment. I would like to add that in July of 2011, our distinguished speaker bestowed the French Cross of Military Valor on 6 U.S. Special Forces soldiers in recognition of their heroism while fighting alongside French troops. This is just one example of the enduring bonds between France and the United States. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending a very warm welcome to His Excellency François Delattre.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Jerejian, for your very kind introduction. 2 kind words. Actually, we've been in Washington for 1 year, and when I presented my credentials to President Obama 1 year ago, we were received with Sophie, with my 2 children, in the Oval Office by the President, by President Obama. It was a very moving moment. And President Obama turned to me and said, Mr. Ambassador, I believe you are the youngest French ambassador ever to my country, to which I began to blush, and to which I answered, Mr. President, it's a great honor to be here. I don't know if I'm the youngest ambassador, but I'm by far the happiest of all ambassadors in your country. And since then, every time we meet, which is not every morning, but every time we meet, he said to me, Ambassador, are you still the happiest? And I answer, more than ever, every time. So call me Mr. More Than Ever. But it's a great pleasure for my wife, Sophie, and for me to be here with you today at the world-renowned James Baker Institute for Public Policy. I would like to acknowledge the presence of Rice University President David Lebrun. I cannot thank you enough, President, for your warm welcome. We had a very interesting meeting right before this presentation. I want to thank your wife, Madame Lebrun. We had such a wonderful tour of Rice University thanks to you. I cannot thank you enough for this. I want, of course, to recognize and thank Ambassador Djeredjian, but also Madame Djeredjian, Françoise, who is right here. As founding director of the Baker Institute, you do an outstanding job, and you put Rice University and Houston on the map worldwide in terms of foreign policy. You really made the Baker Institute one of the leading institutions of its kind in the United States and in the world. I also want to thank you and your wife, Françoise, for your commitment to French-American friendship. I have truly fond memories of the ceremony that took place a few weeks ago now in our residence in Washington, during which I bestowed upon Françoise, upon Madame Delattre, the insignia of the National Order of Mérite, one of France's highest distinction. I also want to recognize Consul General Frédéric Bontemps, and also a warm word of thanks to Madame Susan Baker, who is with us today. It's a great, great honor to have you with us, Madame Baker, and to Madame Lynn Wyatt, who is also with us. And thank to all of you for taking the time. So you asked me to talk about the new opportunities in the Franco-American and transatlantic partnership. Well, I believe the context cannot be more favorable in this respect, and that there are new opportunities today, not only to strengthen the Franco-American and the transatlantic partnership, but also to bring it to a new level for the years and even maybe the decades to come. I think we should start from the new strategic and economic environment that is taking place. On the strategic front, we have left behind the simple certainties of the bipolar world, stable but unjust. We are no longer in the unipolar world that appeared to oversimplify between the two Iraq wars. We live more and more in what the Obama administration names a multi-partner world, what others call a multipolar world. Which way you name it, the concepts are rather close. The fact is that the meteoric rise of China, India, Brazil, and a few others, also in Asia in particular, to name just a few of the emerging countries, is creating a whole new situation. The emerging powers must have their place and their say in the new world order. So the question, and I believe one of the main challenges of our generation, is to know whether we'll be able to shape, to organize such a multi-partner world in which every player feels comfortable and in which the principle of responsible partnership can prevail over those of competition and rivalry. And history shows it's not easy. The subsequent question is to know whether we should do it to shape this multipolar world. We should do it through a more effective multilateralism within the UN, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO, NATO, through a new concert of great powers, the G8, and now more and more the G20, or more convincingly, in our views, through a combination of the two. That's why France has been instrumental in establishing and promoting the G20, and that's why my country is working hard to promote the enlargement of the UN Security Council with new permanent members such as India, Brazil, Germany, Japan, and a fair representation of Africa. That's for the new strategic concept. Now, on the economic front, the main challenge, we believe, is how to overcome the current crisis, of course, but more fundamentally, how to face the growing competition coming from the emerging world and establish a level playing field to prevent social, fiscal, environmental, monetary dumping that are detrimental to our economic interests. That is today a key question. Finally, on the technological front, our views is that we are experiencing three revolutions at the same time. The first is, and you know a bit about it here in Houston, is the revolution of energy, sustainable development, the green tech, the new energy sources, what you call, I believe, sustainability, and I could go on. On this, France and French companies are clearly among the world leaders, together with the United States and with Houston in particular. The second technological revolution has to do with the life sciences, the genetics, the genomics, if it's the right term in English. On this, it's fair to say that France has key assets through its research centers, the Pasteur Institute, for example, its pharmaceutical industry with Sanofi in particular, and I could go on and on. And the third revolution, I believe, that irrigates the others, this is the digital revolution. When I pronounce digital, I always have the mouth full of it. It's difficult to pronounce for a Frenchman, but it's the digital, la révolution digitale. It's simpler. And here, the American leadership is unmatched to a large extent. Now, against the strategic, economic, technological sea changes, against this background, what are some of France's key foreign policy priorities? One of them is clearly to strengthen Europe's position as a global player in the 21st century, better able to promote its values and its interests. The EU is already much more than a free trade zone or even a single market. With its 500 million people, the EU is today the world's leading trade and economic power. It also provides 60%, just to take this example, 60% of the world's total development aid. That is, so to speak, the first floor of what I used to call the European rocket. It's kind for Europe, but the European rocket. The first floor is single market. The second floor is the euro. And here, I think it's important to put things into perspective. When you Americans look at the euro, I think it's important to remember that the euro has been, since its creation 12 years ago, a great success story. A success story for us, Europeans. To give you just one example, in 11 years, it helped us create 14 million jobs in Europe, while at the same time, the US created 8 million jobs. It helped us promote financial and monetary stability in Europe compared to the devaluations that we had over the past decades. But it is also a great success story for you, Americans. It helped, remember 12 years ago, the American press was full of fears about Fortress Europe. And it's exactly the opposite that happened. The euro was a fantastic machine, so to speak, to promote American investment and exports to Europe. So it's been a great success story for you too. Point number one. Point number two, I keep reading here and there that the euro is a weak currency. No, it's not a weak currency, it's a very strong currency, 20 to 20% higher in terms of exchange rate against the dollar. than it was when it was founded 12 years ago. And it's today, in 10 years, it has become the second largest reserve currency or currency reserve in the world. So that's point number 2. And point number 3, we believe that the euro today tends to promote growth. But to summarize, when we founded the euro 12 years ago, we founded a wonderful monetary union, but we forgot a bit about the economic union, the economic leg of it. So what we have to do today, and what we are doing in Europe, even if it seems too slow from this side of the Atlantic, is to meet 3 challenges in one. First challenge is to tackle the roots of the crisis, to tackle the debts and deficits. We have no choice. We have to do it, so we do it to cut the deficits and the debt. That's chapter number 1, and this chapter has a slight German accent, so to speak. Chapter number 2 is, while doing so, at the same time to promote growth through structural reforms. And here, this chapter number 2, which is, I believe, very important for you too, for our American partners, has a slight French accent. And the challenge number 3 is to establish a governance of the Eurozone. When we say governance, it's not a kind of European theoretical, political thing. It's very concrete. It's about putting in place a decision-making process in the Eurozone that simply didn't exist. So how do we decide within the Eurozone? And the second thing in terms of governance is to establish closer coordination of economic, social, and fiscal policies. So we are trying to build in the crisis from scratch the economic leg of the monetary and economic union. We are addressing very seriously, professionally, the 3 issues I was just referring to. And at the end of the crisis, I'm pretty sure that we Europeans will be stronger, better equipped to avoid such a crisis in the future, and stronger partners also, and more reliable partners for you, for our American friends. So that's the second floor of the European rocket. The first, le marché unique, single market. The second, the euro. And the third floor of the European integration has to do with the political integration, which is not the easiest one. To give you just one example, Europe is slowly but surely reinforcing its defense capabilities and its ability to project forces abroad. The Libyan crisis is a good example of it, Libyan crisis, in which, on the European side, France and Britain were the backbone of our efforts. And of course, we experienced in this crisis some shortcomings in terms of air refueling, for example, but European countries under Franco-British leadership have engaged in a collective effort to bridge this gap. Now, consistent with our European priority, a second key objective for my country is to underline the transatlantic relationship as one of the natural pillars of today's globalized world. That's why, on the national security front, we, French, are back in NATO's military command structure. This decision, by the way, brought an end to a paradox in France's position vis-à-vis NATO. France was among the top 3 or 4 largest contributors to the NATO budget, one of the top 3 or 4 contributors to NATO military operations, and yet, because we are not part of NATO's military command, we had no say in NATO planification. So this situation had become absurd in many respects, and France's decision to come back to NATO command structure also marks its ambition to build a stronger European defense, because a stronger European defense and the stronger NATO are, so to speak, the 2 faces of the same coin. And today in France, there is a wide bipartisan consensus in my country about the fact that we are back in NATO's military command structure. We face elections, as you know, and President Sarkozy, as well as his competitor from the Socialist Party, François Hollande, are largely on the same line on this, and I believe it's important. Again, in this respect, on defense, France and the UK are the backbone of European defense, as was clearly illustrated during the Libyan crisis. France and the UK together account for 60% of the total defense spending of the 27 members of the European Union. And it should come as no surprise that France is, with Great Britain, the main European contributor of troops in various operations worldwide, around the world, ranging from Afghanistan to Ivory Coast, from Lebanon to Kosovo. But even more fundamentally, we believe that the transatlantic relationship is more relevant than ever in the new globalized world. Why? Because again, we believe that probably the key challenge of our generation is the following: how to make sure that the emerging powers I was referring to have their place, and a greater place, by the way, a greater say in the international institutions, but how to do so in a way that is consistent with our, European and American, our values, and with our interests. And that's why the transatlantic partnership is more important than ever. It's true in terms of the values that we share, Europeans and Americans. It's true, in terms of the global balance of power, but it's also true on the economic front. I was referring a bit earlier to the fight against various forms of dumping. But if, and I will come back to it, if innovation is a key priority for our countries, then the way to promote this innovation on the international scene through the intellectual property rights is vital. Now, as least on the same front than defense and so on, the promotion of conception or vision of intellectual property rights vis-à-vis the emerging powers is a vital component of the transatlantic partnership. In the same vein, the sensible technologies that we export to China, to India, is another issue that is vital for our interest. So more and more, that's my message today, our transatlantic partnership is less an inward-looking, only security-based partnership, and more an outward-looking partnership that has to do with a triangular relationship, Europe, America, and Asia, and has to do with our fundamental economic interests. I could mention many other strategic challenges, of course, but I don't want to be too long here. One of them is how to prevent a confrontation between Islam and the West, and more positively, how to encourage a true partnership between the two, how to encourage and support the forces of moderation and modernity in each Muslim country to enable an open and tolerant Islam to prevail. I think it's a major challenge, and we have to be helpful here because of its geographic position and its historic relationship with many countries of the Islamic world. We believe that France has an important role to play in this respect and is particularly active on this front. In the same vein, together with the US, we are actively promoting and supporting the democratic movements in the Arab world. Now, against this background, a few words about French-American relations. My first message here is that we should never forget and spread the word to the younger generations that this Franco-American friendship is solidly rooted, anchored in the values that we share. They are what makes our relationship truly unique. It's important to repeat and remember time and again that our two countries owe each other their very existence as free nations, and that from Yorktown to the battlefields of World War I and the beaches of Normandy, we've always stood shoulder to shoulder to promote the values of freedom and democracy that we, after all, together gave the world over 200 years ago. To jump on what you just said, Ambassador, in my position, in my job, so to speak, the most moving moment in when I bestow a key French distinction to American veterans of World War II. When I look to somebody eye in the eye and I say, John Smith, you landed at Omaha Beach, June 6, 1944. You then went to Sainte-Mère-l'Église. I can tell you there is no dry eye in the room, and mine are certainly the least dry of all. In the same vein, I think it's important to remember, and it should come as no surprise, that the largest event ever organized in relation to the September 11th tragedy, to commemorate the September 11th tragedy, was organized in Paris, France, just on the Place du Trocadéro, just in front of the Eiffel Tower, paying tribute, where you have tens of thousands of people paying tribute and respect to the victims of September 11th and to America in general. I think it says a lot about the depths and breadth of our relationship. Now, in this context, I have good news today. French-American relations have never been closer than they are today. It's true on the diplomatic and national security front. In Libya, we prevailed together over Gaddafi, bringing an end to 42 years of a bloody dictatorship. Our two nations are also fighting together in the mountains of Afghanistan to get rid of the last Al-Qaeda supporters, of course, but also to ensure a peaceful, democratic transition in this country. That will be, this issue of Afghanistan will be at the core of the next NATO summit that will take place in Chicago in May. I could go on and on. We are each other's, our two countries are each other's closest ally in the fight against terrorism, from Afghanistan and Pakistan to Yemen, to Sahel, to Somalia. We are also, as I said before, in the forefront of international efforts to support the democratic movements in the Arab world, and we see it will require a strong and long-time commitment, as illustrated by the situation in Egypt, not to mention Syria, but where we are also on the same page. This long-term commitment is illustrated in what we call the Deauville Partnership that was established during the French chairmanship of the G8. Maybe even more importantly, France and the US are taking the lead to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapon state. We French consider this is the #1 strategic challenge of our time, because a nuclear-armed Iran would be, #1, an existential threat to the security of Israel, totally unacceptable, because it would trigger, #2, an arms race, and potentially a nuclear arms race in the most volatile region of the world. Is that what we need today? And because, #3, it would destroy, so to speak, the international non-proliferation regime that we together patiently built over the last decade. So for these reasons, to name just a few of them, a nuclear-armed Iran is not an option. For the same reason, containment is not an option, and that's why we, France, took the initiative to bring the sanctions, to tighten the sanctions against the regime in Iran, and to bring them to an unprecedented level through an oil embargo vis-à-vis Iran. That was really France's initiative, and through the freeze of the assets of the Iranian central bank. And these sanctions are beginning to bite seriously the regime. We are also, our two countries are also working very closely together within the G8 and the G20 to bring a coordinated response to the economic crisis. And on the economic front, and I will end by this, on the economic front, the partnership between our two countries is also growing stronger every year. The backbone of this partnership, more than exports, is cross-investment. And here, if you can spread the word, France is today, depending on the year, the third or the fourth largest foreign investor in your country, with 4,000 French companies supporting more than 650,000 American jobs. And by the way, France is the third leading foreign investor in Texas, with our companies supporting 50,000 American jobs. So it's a lot. We are the third leading investor in your great state. Conversely, the United States, in the #1 foreign investor in France, and American investment in France increased by 30% last year. And it says a lot, I believe, about the state of the French economy. So this is my first message on French-American relations. They've never been closer, and therefore it's the good time to build longer-term partnerships, scientific cooperation, university exchanges. That's why I was really glad after the meeting that we had with the president of Rice University, trying to think about the future and about the closer cooperation that you can establish with Sciences Po or various engineering schools in France. My second message is that you're right to believe in my country. You're right to believe in France's future and, so to speak, to bet on France. There are many reasons for that. Let me give you just 3 illustrations of the fact that it is a good choice. First illustration, France is today the demographic exception in Europe. You have only one country in Europe having a growing population. It's France, together with Ireland, to be completely honest, while all the other European countries have a quite strongly declining population. Number 2, if you ask me what is France's priority today, I would answer without any hesitation, innovation is the #1, #2, and #3 priorities, because it's the thing on which depend our role and our place, so to speak, in tomorrow's world. That's why we have, in France, established 71 innovative clusters all over the country, bringing together the American way, the private sector, the universities, the research centers, and it works. That's why we've put in place in France the highest R&D tax credit in the industrialized world. And every week, when I travel around your great country, I meet some American CEOs who tell me, thank you for your R&D tax credit. It's to a certain extent based on this that I, American CEO, decided to invest in your country. And that's also why we are investing in France $60 billion of private and public money over a period of 3 years in higher education and research. So that gives many new opportunities, this unprecedented investment in research in France, to the Franco-American partnership. And in this respect, it's important to remember that France has a highly educated workforce, particularly in science. 22% of the French population aged 20 to 29 graduated with a degree in science or technology, compared with only 10% in the United States. I believe this is an important asset for my country. This unprecedented effort in terms of innovation goes hand in hand with a booming entrepreneurship in my country. Over the last year, we founded in France more than 600,000 new businesses. It's a spectacular increase compared to previous years. It's a record high in Europe by far. It says a lot about the vitality of the French economy. It says a lot about a sea change in the mentality, about the fact that the younger generations in my country, instead of knocking on my door, instead of knocking on the government's door, they tend to roll up their sleeves, start a business, fail because c'est la vie, start again, and at the end of the day succeed. And it also says a lot about the fact that we French went far in terms of cutting the red tape. And today, if you are a bit gifted, which is not my case, you can start a business in France in 15 minutes online. So there are very encouraging and positive things in France. And to conclude, I will just say that, to come back to the values I was referring to, the values of freedom, democracy, human rights, in the testing times we are going through, in the challenging times that we know, these values are more important than ever, I believe. They are more than ever our best tool, I would even say our best moral compass to confront together the current challenges we face. And my second message to conclude, and my last one this time, is to tell you that the more I live, and I believe, Sophie, the more we live in this country that we love, the more we believe in this country. And more importantly, the more we French, as a country, we bet on America. We bet on America's future because of institutions such as yours, Ambassador, because of universities such as yours, dear President, but also because of the ability that you have, you Americans, to constantly reinvent yourselves, to be never satisfied of what you have, but to try to get a step further, and again, to constantly, permanently reinvent yourselves. Alors, mes chers amis, j'ai été un peu long, et je vous conclurai cette petite présentation en vous disant « Vive les États-Unis, vive la France, et vive l'amitié franco-américaine ». Merci.
When are you coming back?
Tomorrow.
We have some time for some questions from the audience. Please raise your hands and address the ambassador. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for coming here to Houston. My question is that you briefly touched on the fact that the European Union has a singular monetary policy, but still is addressing the singular fiscal policy that it's having issues with. How ready is the French public in subsidizing future efforts of having a singular fiscal policy while they're taking care of perhaps their, what could be assumed, their poorer neighbors to the south?
It's a good question. Two things about it, not to enter the details. First, we have something in common. We French and you from Texas, we are fiercely independent. And we don't like, you are the same, I believe, we don't like that anybody tells us what to do or even what to think. If I say that, it's not to say that we are not Europeans. We are convinced that we should go a step further in terms of European integration. It's only to tell you that we'll remain as we are, as are many other European countries. And in the dialectic, so to speak, between federalist integration and intergovernmental federation, we tend to lean toward the latter, the intergovernmental institution. It's true also in terms of the fiscal integration that you are referring to. Yes, to a much more coordinated policy between the member states of the European Union. No, quite frankly, to give our sovereignty to an anonymous, bureaucratic body, unelected body that would, we believe, lead to nowhere. But again, it doesn't mean that we are not ready to go far with the Germans and with other countries in terms of coordinating our economic, fiscal, social policies. That's what we do, for example, with Germany in terms of going towards the same impôt sur les sociétés, business tax on businesses. You know, we are going to have the same tax on businesses between France and Germany in the next years.
Over here we have something called NAFTA, North American Free Trade. How about North Atlantic Free Trade? What is in the cards there in the future?
It's a very good question. 3 years ago, faced with the same question, I would have probably answered, it's a bit early, it's a bit difficult, a bit dangerous. Today, you're absolutely right, it's in the air again. For one good reason, is because the multilateral negotiations of Doha have, I mean, they are not completely failed yet, but they are not in a good mood, so to speak. And that's why we have, between the key players of the World Trade Organization, Europe, America, Asia, to try to develop bilateral free trade agreements. And today, we French, and I believe we Europeans, are more ready than it were a few years ago to engage conversations on this, not only to lower tariffs, by the way, between Europe and America, but also to fight against the non-tariff barriers, it's the right thing in English, between the European Union and the United States. And so, yes, we are ready to think about it, and most probably that is what is going to happen in the coming weeks.
You've answered everyone's questions. Dr. Mendelson.
Your country is almost unique in having a majority of its power nuclear. And do you have any advice for us, because this country is still floundering in trying to figure out how to develop an energy policy that makes sense?
Thank you for the question and for the way you raise it, because you know the traditional and well-known French modesty, and you know how to talk to a French ambassador. But quite frankly, we have no lesson, seriously. We have no lesson to give here. But you're right, in France, nuclear energy accounts for 75% of our electricity, while under your watch it's 20% here in this country. After the Fukushima tragedy, I think we, as well as our American friends, stayed the course and will continue, more or less, of course, the path we have chosen. What is really important today is to make safety and security, more than ever, even more than before, should I say, the #1 priority. And that's why, together with our American friends, we are promoting the highest safety, but actively promoting, I mean, the highest safety standards worldwide to avoid such a catastrophe to happen again. And on this, more than ever, France and the US, it's another good example, are on the same boat. We know that Japan has only started 2 of its 54 nuclear reactors based on the Fukushima tragedy. We know that Germany is slowly going to reduce its part of nuclear energy. There is a debate in France on this, but I would say each of the 2 candidates does agree to maintain quite a strong part of nuclear in our energy mix. And so more than ever, it's another good example. France and the US are among the 2 leading players in this field of nuclear energy.
Okay, Mr. Ambassador. I just want to share with you that before the ambassador gave his lecture, he met with some of our Rice University students who have gone to IFRI, the Institut Français des Relations Internationales. It's the French Institute for International Relations in Paris. We have a summer internship program for our Rice students there. It's a terrific program of mentoring in various fields, and so we are really connecting with our students and this institution in France. It's just one of the little things we're doing in terms of our bilateral relationship. Please join me in welcoming the ambassador for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.